Police found him crouched over a lifeless body. His mouth was covered in blood. He was biting into the man's face while growling like an animal. They tased him, kicked him, released a police dog, but nothing stopped him, not until they pried him off by force. This case is about a college student from a quiet Florida suburb who walked out of a restaurant one humid August evening and descended into something no one could explain. The streets were calm, crickets echoed through palm-lined neighborhoods. But within hours, police would be pulling a 19-year-old off a man's lifeless body while he growled and bit into his face like a wild animal. His name was Austin Harrouff. To his family and friends, he was a gifted pre-med student. He had a charming smile and a promising future. He came from privilege. His father was a successful dentist. His mother worked in pharmacy. Palm Beach County was one of the wealthiest places in America. Austin had every opportunity, but beneath the surface, something was unraveling. He had begun acting strangely, patrolling his house at night, moving his bed to the garage, telling friends he was immortal. On August 15th, 2016, Austin joined his family for dinner at a local restaurant. He suddenly stormed out in a fit of rage. He walked through dark streets for miles until he came upon the open garage of John and Michelle Stevens. They were sitting in lawn chairs, enjoying the summer air. They had never met him before. What happened next would shake the country and raise impossible questions about mental illness, violent psychosis, and the very limits of human control. This is not a story about monsters. It is a story about what happens when the mind breaks and no one sees it coming. The summer of 2016 was thick with heat in Palm Beach County. The air hung heavy in the late afternoons, and the sun baked everything in sight. But something colder was moving inside Austin Harrouff. Friends began noticing shifts in his behavior. He had always been a bit different, intense at times, but now there was something stranger, something harder to ignore. He started talking about supernatural ideas. He believed he had superhuman strength. He believed he could not die. His YouTube channel and online presence showed erratic thoughts and bursts of emotion. In private, he became obsessed with strength, transformation, purity. He spoke of being half man, half animal. His parents grew concerned. At night, he roamed the house without explanation. He moved his bed into the garage and said he felt safer sleeping there. He paced through the rooms like a guard. His eyes seemed distant, his thoughts increasingly disconnected from reality. His father suspected drugs. His mother wondered if it was a breakdown. They thought about having him committed under Florida's Baker Act, but no one acted fast enough. Austin's spiral had already begun. Days before the attack, he seemed to flicker between moods, laughing one moment, snapping the next. On the morning of August 15th, he visited a friend and asked cryptic questions about his own birth year. At the beach that day, he stared blankly into the water and mumbled about immortality. His family tried to shrug it off. Maybe it was just a bad phase, but the tension was no longer hidden. That evening, they all met at a local restaurant for dinner, Duffy's Sports Grill. It was noisy and crowded. The hum of televisions, the clatter of plates, the sizzle of fried food filling the air. But Austin was slipping deeper. He began arguing with his father, pacing between the table and the parking lot. Witnesses later said he was muttering to himself. At one point, he slammed the door. Then, without warning, he walked out of the restaurant for the last time and disappeared into the night. The sun had already set. The streets were quiet. Sidewalks were empty, except for the occasional shuffle of feet or the low roar of passing cars. Austin walked for several miles, cutting through shadows and streetlights, following no path that anyone could later trace. His phone was left behind. No GPS, no messages, only silence and motion. Somewhere in that silence, he arrived at the driveway of John and Michelle Stevens. They were sitting in their open garage. It was something they often did, folding chairs, a small table, cold drinks in hand, the soft chirp of cicadas in the distance. Their garage was a space of comfort and routine. They were just enjoying the evening, unaware of what was coming toward them. Austin entered the space without a word. There was no warning, no conversation. Something in him snapped. The first moments of the attack are still not fully understood, but within minutes, both John and Michelle were brutally assaulted. It was fast, brutal, senseless. Neighbors heard screams. Jeff Fisher, who lived across the street, ran toward the sound. What he saw shook him to his core. He tried to pull Austin away, but was met with violent resistance. Austin turned on him, slashed him, left him bleeding. Jeff stumbled away and called 911. His voice trembled. He told the dispatcher that a man was attacking his neighbors, that he had tried to help and was hurt, that he had never seen anything like this. He said the man was not using a weapon. He was using his body. By the time deputies arrived, they found Austin on top of John Stevens, growling, blood smeared across his face. He was biting the man's skin, tearing at it with his teeth. His hands were clenched, his entire body tense with rage. They shouted commands. Nothing. They fired a taser, no response. They kicked him, still nothing. Finally, they unleashed a K-9 unit. Even then, Austin would not let go. It took multiple officers to finally subdue him and pull him off the body. Austin was restrained, cuffed, and loaded into an ambulance. He was barely conscious, foaming at the mouth, breathing erratically. He had ingested a mix of household chemicals. Later tests would reveal he had severe internal damage. His liver and kidneys were failing. He would spend days in a medically induced coma, hovering between life and death. Back at the scene, officers tried to understand what they had just witnessed. It did not look like a robbery. It did not look like a break-in. There was no motive that made sense. Just two innocent people in their garage. Just a quiet street shattered by something primal and unexplained. The case was no longer just a local tragedy. Within hours, news stations picked it up. The details sounded too bizarre to be real. A college student with no criminal history had carried out an attack so violent that even seasoned investigators were left speechless. As the pieces began to fall into place, the deeper question began to surface. Not just how this happened, but why, and whether anyone could have stopped it before the final scream echoed into the dark. The garage lights were still on when police arrived. Their squad cars cut through the darkness with flashing red and blue. The sirens faded as engines powered down and boots hit the pavement. The neighborhood, usually quiet and tucked away behind trimmed hedges and soft porch lights, had already started to change. Something had ruptured the calm. A man had called 911 moments earlier. He was bleeding and breathless. He had tried to stop what was happening across the street, but failed. His voice cracked through the radio with panic. The officers approached quickly, guns drawn, voices raised. They did not know what they were walking into. The only sounds now were the high-pitched ringing of insects and the crunch of gravel underfoot. What they found was something no one expected. In the open garage, a man was lying on the concrete. His body was still, his shirt soaked in blood, and straddling him was another man, shirtless and shaking. His body was slick with sweat and red across his mouth. He was hunched low, biting into the face of the man beneath him. The officer shouted commands. There was no reaction. The man did not look up. He did not flinch. He growled like an animal, deep, guttural, raw. The officer fired a taser. The prongs struck skin. The current jolted through his body, but he did not stop. Another officer stepped in and kicked him in the side. Still nothing. The attacker was locked in place. His jaw clenched tight around flesh. It was as if the pain did not reach him, as if the world around him no longer existed. They released the K-9 unit. A trained police dog lunged forward and bit down. The man barely responded. The struggle that followed was chaos. Officers had to physically tear him off the body beneath him. The smell of blood and sweat was thick. The screams had stopped. All that remained was the sound of labored breathing and shouted orders. John Stevens was already gone. His wife Michelle had been found nearby. Her body showed clear signs of a violent and fatal attack. There was no time to process what had happened. Officers restrained the suspect and realized he was barely conscious. He was foaming at the mouth. His pupils were blown wide. His breathing was shallow. It was only later they would learn he had swallowed household chemicals, a toxic mix that burned through his insides and pushed him toward organ failure. The suspect was Austin Harrouff, just 19 years old. A college student with no criminal history, no prior violent behavior. His friends had seen him hours earlier, laughing, talking, then gone. Now he was lying on a stretcher, unresponsive, covered in blood that was not his own. Paramedics worked quickly. They stabilized him and rushed him to the hospital. His condition was critical. At one point, his heart nearly stopped. The toxins had shredded his liver and kidneys. He was placed in a medically induced coma. Back at the crime scene, investigators tried to make sense of what they had witnessed. The Stevens garage was littered with overturned chairs, broken glass, blood pooling in uneven cracks in the floor. Neighbors watched from behind fences and windows. Some had heard the screams. Others had only come out when the flashing lights painted their walls red. The neighborhood felt hollow, like the air had been pulled out of it. Forensic teams moved through the house slowly. No signs of a break-in, no evidence that Austin knew the victims, no motive, no warning, just a random explosion of violence with no clear beginning. The most disturbing detail remained the same in every officer's report. He was biting the man's face, not metaphorically, literally, with his teeth, holding him down with his full weight. Media outlets picked up the story quickly. They called it animalistic. They called it demonic. Rumors of drug use circulated. Speculation filled the gaps. Was it synthetic drugs? A psychotic episode? Possession? No one had answers, only images. A bloody garage, a man with bite marks, a young attacker with no memory of the crime. Hospital staff treated Austin under heavy guard. Toxicology screens returned negative for bath salts, negative for flakka, none of the usual suspects. Instead, doctors found common medications, caffeine, slight traces of THC, and evidence of internal burns from the chemicals he ingested. The full weight of what happened did not register for days. 2 innocent people had died in the most violent way imaginable. Their neighbor had nearly lost his life trying to stop it, and the man responsible had no clear reason, no history of violence, only a mind unraveling in full view of those who loved him. This was the turning point, the moment the story stopped being about a troubled teen and became something else, something darker, a moment frozen in police reports and body cam footage, a moment where the human body became a weapon and no one understood why. The house where John and Michelle Stevens once lived now sits in silence. The garage is empty. The folding chairs are gone. The air around it feels heavy, like it remembers. Neighbors still walk past, but they never stop. They never speak about what happened out loud. Some have moved away. Others keep their blinds drawn. The light in that part of the street flickers more often than it used to. Austin Harrouff survived. He spent weeks recovering under guard. Machines kept his body alive while the country tried to make sense of what it had seen. In courtrooms and hospitals, his eyes often looked distant. His voice was soft. He claimed to remember nothing. Experts spoke about psychosis. Some mentioned clinical lycanthropy, a delusion where a person believes they are becoming something not human. The Stevens family never got a full explanation. There was no note, no history between them and their killer. Just a random collision with someone who had lost all grip on reality. The justice system hesitated. Was this a crime or a breakdown? Could someone this detached truly be held responsible? Years passed. The headlines faded, but the trauma remained quiet and sharp. A neighbor who had tried to help still carries the scars. Not all of them are visible. Some are stitched beneath silence. The Florida sun still sets over that street. The palms still rustle in the breeze. But that garage will never feel ordinary again. It holds the echo of something that should not have happened, and nothing in it has moved since. Austin Harrouff walked barefoot for miles before arriving at the Stevens home. No camera captured his path. No witness saw the moment he crossed into their garage. Toxicology reports found no hallucinogens in his system. The chemicals he drank were never identified by brand. He claimed to see demons, but never described their faces. The family had considered the Baker Act, but hesitated. By the time they reached for help, it was already too late. Today, the Stevens mailbox still stands at the edge of their yard. Letters no longer arrive. The nameplate is weathered, but untouched.